14. You don't say. December came in a hurry. All of a sudden, the city transformed into a wind tunnel, aggressively blowing in a whole new wintry resolve. I still couldn't rule out the possibility of a random hot streak, given the weather's consistently roller coastery performance, but there was a new, more permanent smell of cold and early darkness that made me pretty certain that I wouldn't feel warm weather for a long while. The office atmosphere changed as well. Everything seemed to have taken on a new significance after the success of RG's bill. Pyle had felt forced to sign it, which he'd done without fanfare, and no doubt with a dark scowl on his pouting face. Senior groups and healthcare advocates across the country countered this with smiles and cheers for the new law. The media had devoted a fair amount of ink to the development, and despite Bremen's best efforts, in parentheses, and some more damaging quotes from unnamed sources, close parentheses, interest in RG seemed heightened, which contributed to the charged and happy environment the office had become. Though RG was spending most of his time in Ohio since Congress had adjourned for the year, the work carried on. Aaron's schedule had grown even crazier as Bremen was taking advantage of the recess to campaign at a frantic pace. As a result, Aaron traveled incessantly, returning to D.C. for only a few days of the week. Though this strained our relationship, it also injected it with an even headier passion for when we only had a few nights to spend with one another. Any festering annoyances were subsumed by a greater sexual tension. If relationships were all about compromise, lately ours was all about compromising positions. I wasn't complaining, and though we didn't feel all that steady or balanced to me, we certainly felt thrilling, which was enough to keep me hooked. Meanwhile, the flu started making the rounds of Capitol Hill with a vengeance during the second week of December. I upped my vitamin C intake and wondered if it would be too freaky for everyone if I whipped out my surgical mask. I decided for the time being that it might be. That Thursday, Mona and I accompanied RG to New York City, where he was to be the replacement headliner at the AARP convention. Senator Bremen had pulled out at the last minute to attend a very important party barbecue in Des Moines, and RG had agreed to fill in. He'd asked Mona and me to come along to staff the event. As we pulled into Penn Station, I braced myself for the crush of humanity that characterized New York City for me. I found the place invigorating but overwhelming. I needed practice with this metropolis, and I was happy to have it. At the AARP convention site, we waded into a crowd of politically active senior citizens who gave RG a hero's welcome. He delivered a rousing speech and spent an hour working the room before returning to the hotel by 8 o'clock. Mona had scheduled a fundraising breakfast and a round table with city public health officials to justify an overnight stay, and she and I drank a little wine to unwind as we prepared RG's briefing books for the following day. So, things seem to be going well with you and Mark, I said, cheerfully as we sipped our drinks and sorted through the papers. They weren't public about their new romance, but it was obvious to anyone who paid attention. They ate lunch together every day and left cute little coded post-it notes on each other's computers. I couldn't tell if they credited me for their love or not, but I was content with the satisfaction of a job well done. Yeah, they are. He's really great, she said with a smile. Mona didn't exhibit any insecurity about her relationship. Given that she'd been aware of Mark's earlier crush on me, I'd been worried that she harbored some sort of animosity towards me now that she was dating him. This didn't seem to be the case, which I found relieving, if a bit surprising. I doubted I'd be as mature were I in her shoes. "Are you and Aaron still together?" Mona asked after a pause. "Uh-huh," I nodded. "He's traveling a lot now," I sighed. "With Bremen?" Mona asked. Was there a judgmental tinge to her tone, or was I being hypersensitive? "Yeah, I hate that he works for him, but, it's a good job," I answered. Mona nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she kept whatever it was to herself and took another sip of wine. Feeling self-conscious, I gulped mine and started babbling about the sacrifices one makes for a relationship. Luckily, by the time we finished the briefings, the conversation had become much smoother, and by the time we had each finished our second glass of wine, Mona had invited me out to an event she was attending later that night with her friend Jane. Jane's dad is Trey Gandon, the PR guy, and he's throwing a big party for CW Magazine, she explained. CW Magazine was a new political and cultural monthly that had just been launched. I hadn't been aware of Mona's connection to the New York City party scene. Jane and I grew up together in Chicago, she explained. Trey Gandon is an old friend of my parents. His wife, who passed away a while ago, was my mom's best friend in high school, so we go way back. I had forgotten about Mona's Chicago roots. I had always assumed that everyone in RG's office had been born and raised in Ohio, like me. But there were a few exceptions. Mona had gone to college at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland and moved to D.C. shortly after. We headed downtown to the party and met Jane at the door. Inside, flashbulbs lit up the rooms filled with glamorous and important people. "Is there any chance that Steve Martin will be here?" I asked Jane. "Hopefully." I looked over the guest list and I don't think I saw his name, she answered. That was alright. I wasn't looking that great anyway. Unaware of the possibility of attending such a swanky party, I hadn't packed anything too stunning. My loose blouse suddenly seemed more shapeless than flowing, as it hung listlessly over my black pants, and my shoes weren't as elegant as they could have been. Yep, I was feeling distinctly dowdy. My only solace was that Mona was beside me wearing a reindeer sweater, and she'd known what was in store. "There's my dad," Jane indicated. A handsome man in his 50s. "Let me go grab him. I know he'll want to say hi," she said as she rushed off. As I reached for a glass of champagne, I saw Senator Spearham enter the party, decked out in a stylish pantsuit. I wondered if this was something RG would have liked to attend. Had Mona asked him? He turned it down. Mona informed me when I inquired. That made sense. He was probably much happier in his hotel room, catching up on his reading. Jane returned with her dad, who gave Mona a big hug. "I'm so happy you could make it," he said warmly. "I was just talking to your dad this afternoon." I liked Trey Gandon immediately. He chatted with us for a few minutes, but got pulled away fairly quickly. Soon after, he was calling Jane over to say hello to Senator Spearham. Turning back to Mona, I noticed that her eyes had narrowed, making her eyebrows even more pronounced than usual. "What's wrong?" I asked. Mona looked at me and blinked. She finished her champagne. "Can you keep a secret?" she asked. Yes, I certainly could, and I hoped it was a good one. Of course, I said in my most trustworthy tone. All right. Mona breathed softly as she checked to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. Trey's never remarried, but you know who he's been seeing? Melanie Spearham. My jaw dropped. He was having an affair with Senator Spearham? Senator Spearham was married. Granted, it was to a notorious ladies' man, but still. I couldn't believe she would do such a thing when she was running for president. After preparing herself so painstakingly for so many years, why on earth would she take such a risk? You're kidding me. Really? Mona nodded. They've been together for about 6 months. Trey feels really guilty about it, but you know all about Jeff Spearham, Mona said. It's not as though Trey's breaking up a real marriage. Is Spearham going to leave her husband for him? I asked. Mona shrugged. I don't know. I'm not even supposed to know about any of this. Trey told my dad and Jane confides in me, but no one knows. They've really been amazingly discreet. And Trey, Mr. Gandon, he really likes Spearham, I asked incredulously. Yeah, he's really taken with her. Although, I guess there are some issues. She's apparently jealous like you wouldn't believe, Mona said. Really? Wow. And who knew Mona was a font of such radioactive gossip? That's shocking, I concluded. We watched Senator Spearham move away from Mr. Gandon and Jane and on to another clutch of partygoers. Besides a backwards glance towards Mr. Gandon, she didn't exhibit any sign of a deeper intimacy. From my perspective, they were pretty good at hiding what was going on. I'm going to get a glass of water. Do you want one? Mona asked. No, I wanted more champagne, but I nodded yes to the water and pretended to check my BlackBerry as Mona left, so I didn't look entirely lost and friendless. A few seconds into my charade, I sensed someone watching me. I looked up quickly to see Senator Spearham staring at me from across the room. Did she sense that we'd been talking about her? Surely not. I turned around to see who she was really looking at, but no one was there. When I turned back, she had shifted her gaze, leaving me to question whether my imagination had just been playing tricks on me. I watched Spearham a little longer, wondering what it felt like to be her. Even before I had heard the salacious tales of her personal life, I had found her professional one fascinating. She'd spent her life grooming herself to be the first female president of the United States, and now she was within reach of her goal. Brayman was still leading in the polls, but Spearham was directly behind him, just waiting for him to stumble. For months, the three frontrunners had been Brayman, Spearham, and Rexford. By most accounts, Spearham had just been waiting for Rexford to run out of money, with an eye to picking up his supporters and bypassing Brayman in time to grab the nomination. There was no guarantee that she'd be able to pull off such a feat, but as I watched her, she appeared cool and confident. She was working the crowd like the professional that she was. A woman who looked like she must be a model sidled up next to me. She had long, wavy hair and was wearing a short red dress. Are you close with the Gandons? She asked pleasantly. I didn't realize immediately that she was talking to me. Am I? Oh, no, I just met them tonight. How about you? I replied. No, I'm here on business. She looked me in the eyes. So there's nothing going on between you and Trey Gandon? She asked. What? This was bizarre. Not that I know of, I answered slowly. Sorry, what was your name? "I'm Christy," she said with a smile as she moved away. "See you later." And with that, she poured herself between two people and back into the crowd, leaving me very confused. I wondered what the hell she'd been talking about. And I also wondered why all models with whom I had any connection were named some variation of Isty. Between her and Misty, I was beginning to suspect a conspiracy. I took a lap around the room to recover from the odd interaction and ended up trapped in a conversation with an elderly woman who kept asking me to identify the various celebrities scattered about, as well as the different appetizers parading by on trays. It was hard to tell whether she was more excited about Meryl Streep or the shrimp kebabs. After 20 minutes, I finally managed to extricate myself from the conversation by telling her I needed to find the facilities, which by that point was actually the truth. I hated it when hipster places had cleverly hidden bathrooms. Accordingly, I had worked myself into a foul mood when I finally negotiated the oversized plant labyrinth disguising a fake wooden wall that the waiter had assured me swung open into a ladies' room when pressed in the right place. I entered, shaking my head in disgust. Not surprisingly, it was deserted. I doubted anyone else would be able to find it without a detailed map. The first sign that someone else actually had was the stifled sob I heard as I washed my hands. All the doors to the heavy oaken stalls were ajar, but someone was evidently occupying the one at the far end. "Hello," I called. "Are you okay?" Christy peered around the side of the door. "Oh, it's you," she said weakly, before bursting into sobs. I looked around for help, but there wasn't any. What was I supposed to do? Should I leave her alone? It didn't seem right to leave a bereft model on the floor of an impossibly located ladies' room that no one might find for years. What if she became incapacitated with grief? She could starve here. It looked like she might already be starving. "Don't cry," I said helplessly. "I never should have agreed to this job," she said as she blew her nose. "It makes me feel like a whore." "I'm not a whore. I'm a model/actress, she said pointedly. It was good to maintain that distinction. "Okay," I said in a validating tone. "That's great." "It's not great when the only job you can get hired for is to be bait," she said bitterly, before breaking down again. What was she talking about? I decided to keep my mouth shut and look sympathetic and just let her elaborate at her own pace. "So I just made a fool of myself for $500, she said in strangled gasps. "Throwing myself at this perfectly nice man with his daughter right there. All because this woman is convinced that he's cheating. I feel like such an idiot. This isn't me. This is humiliating. God, the way he looked at me," she said with a shudder. "Are you talking about Trey Gandon?" I asked in surprise. After all, Trey Gandon had been the one she'd quizzed me about. "Yeah," Christy sobbed, "and I'm sorry I bothered you, but figuring out if anyone else was involved with him was part of my fee. That woman is crazy," she said. "You mean Melanie Spearham?" I asked quickly. I couldn't believe the story I was putting together in my head. Was Spearham that jealous? Christy looked momentarily hesitant. A doubtful look clouded her wet and vacant eyes. "No, I don't know her name," she said unconvincingly. I could tell she was lying. Being a particularly bad liar myself, I could spot a similar ineptitude in others. All of a sudden, I wanted to know the truth. "Of course it's Spearham. I know all about this," I said authoritatively. "Gosh, I'm sorry you had to deal with her," I added compassionately. This last little touch worked. Christy's eyes welled up again. "She seemed so nice at first," she said simply. "She told me Trey was her sister's husband, and she wanted hard evidence that he was being unfaithful. I needed the money, and it seemed like an easy job, but I didn't think about how it would make me feel, Christy continued forlornly. It's not even that he didn't want me, it's the whole... She leaned over and threw up into the toilet. My heart went out to her. She certainly wasn't the hardened vixen she'd felt compelled to play. She was literally made sick by her actions. Melanie Spearham hadn't chosen her bait very well. It's okay, I said as I gingerly rubbed her back. I want to go apologize to Mr. Gandon, she said softly. I don't care about the money anymore. She didn't even believe me when I told her he turned me down. She said maybe I was just saying that because I got in a crush on him. Wow, Spearham was paranoid. But he did turn me down. He looked so horrified, she said with a catch in her throat. Do you think I should explain things to him so he'll know I'm not like that? She asked me. She seemed lost and helpless, and she was really looking to me for guidance, which was a bit frightening. Should she tell Trey Gandon? It was hard to predict what his reaction might be in terms of his relationship with Melanie Spearham, but I really liked him and thought it was only fair that he knew the nature of the woman with whom he was involved. I actually felt bad for everyone caught up in this situation, even Spearham, who was acting so rashly and unreasonably, seemed deserving of sympathy. Years of being married to a Lothario in a relationship that had, by most accounts, substituted power for love had evidently taken its toll. She refused to trust anymore. Still, considering her political aspirations, her recklessness was stunning. Christy was sniffling. I think you should explain, I said impulsively. If you can prevent someone out there from having the wrong impression of you, why not do it? It might make you feel less bad about all of this. Really? You think so? She asked eagerly. 10 minutes later, I found Mona sipping her water and looking sleepy. Come watch this and I'll explain later, I said as I tugged her around a large column. We observed Mr. Gannon and Jane talking to a couple across the room. As they finished and turned towards us, Christy strode purposefully towards them. Jane put her arm on her dad's protectively. Christy made a gesture of appeasement. We couldn't hear anything that she said, but over the next few minutes, we watched Mr. Gannon's and Jane's faces shift from apprehension to disbelief to horror. Mr. Gannon put his arm around Christy's shoulder in a comforting gesture as he looked quickly around the room. I wondered if he believed Christy's story or if he just considered her unhinged. I followed his gaze to where Melanie Spearham stood chatting with the photographer and celebrity reporter. At the same moment, she looked over at him. I watched her stop talking mid-sentence. The reporter and photographer turned to find the source of the distraction. What's going on? Mona asked. She didn't sound sleepy anymore. That woman in the red dress was hired by Spearham to lure Mr. Gandon into doing something that would prove he wasn't being faithful to their affair, I whispered quickly. What? Mona asked incredulously. I agreed it sounded far-fetched, but so had the news of the affair in the first place. And now that woman is telling Mr. Gandon about the whole thing. Her name's Christy, by the way. She's a sweet girl. Not all that bright, but a nice person. She feels really terrible about the whole thing. Mona stared at me. Are you making this up? She asked. No, I swear. There was a ladies' room confession. Oh my gosh, what the hell is Spearm doing? Spearm was marching over to where the Gandons and Christy were still standing. The photographer followed her, no doubt sniffing some drama. Even from a distance, we could see that Spearm's normally composed features had worked themselves into a terrible sneer. She is famous for her temper, Mona said softly beside me. Sure, but she was also famous for being incredibly intelligent and thoroughly political. Surely she wouldn't cause a scene here that could expose her affair. This place was crawling with journalists, 2 of them hot on her tail. I knew you were just like Jeff. Spearm shrieked loud enough for us to hear. Or maybe she would cause a scene. The train wreck that unfolded before our eyes was impossible to look away from, much as I wanted to at all times. All I could do was stare and cringe, amazed that someone who had spent so much time carefully constructing a path to the top could self-destruct so completely in a moment of passionate neurosis. Melanie Spearm had never threatened her political ambitions with outbursts over her husband's much whispered about liaisons. What made her act so rashly in regards to her lover's imagined ones? So is that what you want, a little whore? You said you love me. She was shrieking as photographers quickly began documenting this unlikely scene. Trey Gandon was trying to calm her and control the situation as best he could, but Spearm had orbited off into another realm. She would not be mollified. Mona and I had unconsciously moved closer. I told you he turned me down, Christy was protesting. Spearm glared at her before whipping back around to Gandon. How many others are there? She spat. Melanie, calm down, Gandon said forcefully. You, calm the hell down, she yelled as she slapped him across the face. Something in her follow-through made me suspect this was not the first time she had employed that cliché move. Everyone watched her stalk off, her 3 staffers looking utterly traumatized in the lights of the flashing cameras. Trey Gandon was immediately besieged. Have you and Senator Spearm been having an affair? How long has this affair gone on? Who's the girl? How do you think this affects her presidential campaign? Are you angling to be first man? The high-profile party had turned on its creator. Members of the press and curious guests swarmed in for the kill. I watched Gandon hold up his hand in the gesture of a man determined to maintain control whether he was allowed to or not. Thank you all for coming. There is nothing more to be said here. It's my understanding Senator Spearm isn't feeling well. I sincerely hope it wasn't the food. Good night. And he directed Jane and Christy towards a private hold, ignoring the questions that were still being yelled at him. We watched them disappear into the room and stood speechless for another 30 seconds. Had all that really happened? It seemed impossible. I turned to Mona, still slack-jawed. Wow, I said weakly. Let's get another drink, Mona said definitively. That had been enough to get anyone off water. After another drink and several assurances that what we thought we'd seen really had taken place, Mona and I made our way back to the hotel. Should we see if RG's awake? I asked. Mona looked uncertain. I guess we could bury him, she said. I sent a message informing him we had news he'd be interested in, but nothing that couldn't wait until the next day. He wrote back that he was still awake reading and wanted to know what was up. Mona and I went up to his suite, which led to my first ever gossip session with RG. You're kidding me, RG said as we finished our tale. She really lost it like that? We confirmed that she had. Poor Melanie. We've never gotten along, but it sounds like she's going through a rough time. She must be mortified, he said, shaking his head sadly. I'd heard RG privately compare Spearham to Brayman in the way that she was fiercely competitive and tended to either use people or feel threatened by them. RG's compassion for her therefore surprised me, though I supposed it shouldn't have. I admired this generosity of spirit, but doubted I could approximate it. Schadenfreude was too tempting an emotion. Do you think her campaign is over? I asked RG. I wouldn't imagine so, he replied, though I don't know because she's certainly a fighter. We'll have to see how she handles it in the next couple of days. He shook his head in disbelief. She's normally so professional about everything. Although if she was ever going to crack, I guess it would be now, with the intensity of the campaign. The pressure she's been under has crushed plenty of candidates in the past. She must have just snapped, and this guy must have really gotten to her. The irony was that Trey Gandon had been completely faithful to Melanie Spearham, according to Mona, who added that Spearham was crazy not to realize how wonderful he was. Well, she's a toxic person, RG concluded. It seemed as though she had finally poisoned herself. The media frenzy over the next few days suggested that there was no available antidote to the situation. Spearham issued a statement about a quote-unquote misunderstanding and reaffirmed her devotion to her husband, calling suggestions of an affair scurrilous lies. But the photos of her screaming at Gandon and the testimony of the scandalized onlookers, combined with the development that Gandon's housekeeper opened up to the press about just how frequently Senator Spearham had been a guest at the home, quickly drowned out Spearham's claims. Gandon was refusing to comment on the crisis, except to call himself a quote-unquote supporter of Senator Spearham's, who wished her nothing but the best. Other than that, he was responding to every question with the beleaguered no comment. He had a reputation for being a top PR guy, but he seemed unprepared to properly handle this most personal of projects. Christy had been very honest about her role in the drama. I wanted to believe this was to fully cleanse herself of her crime, rather than a cynical act of self-promotion, but either way, it was certainly keeping her in hot demand. Aaron couldn't believe that I'd actually witnessed the whole event firsthand, and listened utterly rapt as I regaled him with in-depth personal commentary on the scandalous developments. Feeling like an embedded reporter who'd returned from the front, I happily soaked up his attention. My contentment was marred only by his excited predictions that Spearham's bad break would translate into a windfall for Brayman. When I had reminded Aaron that I would consider that a terrible development, he'd stopped openly crowing about it, but not quite soon enough. Though I didn't like Spearham very much, I was a bit saddened by her downfall. Her strong showing in the primary polls had made me proud that the country had finally seemed ready for a female chief executive, something that a lot of people I knew claimed was an impossibility for at least another generation. So I felt dismayed that this important experiment seemed to be over for the time being, as well as irked by the fact that she'd been undone by a sex scandal of all things. I was really getting sick of those. Meanwhile, Mona and I had become bonded through our shared witnessing of the unbelievable episode. We now talked regularly throughout the days, and she kept me updated on Jane's condition, which was shell-shocked, but okay. Mona was just relaying their most recent conversation when CNN broke the news of Spearham's official withdrawal from the presidential race. Hold on a second, I said as I turned up the volume. Senator Spearham's announcement comes just hours after her husband made a Stray comment that got picked up by a boom mic at a business convention he was addressing. The newscaster intoned. What's this now? CNN cut to footage of Jeff Spearman talking with another man. His posture indicated he assumed it was a private conversation. The angle of the camera revealed it was shooting from a distance. Jeff and the man were laughing. The audio was crackly but distinct. What's the girl's name? Cindy or something? She's everywhere now, the man said. I've been watching her, Jeff Spearman answered. Hell, I wish Melanie hadn't wasted her on Trey. I would have screwed that bait. His companion guffawed. Jeff Spearman was apparently unaware that his comments had been overheard. The newscaster continued. I imagine he was pretty aware of it now.